Welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Career Mode, the long season, episode 10. And the first thing I have to notice here is that we've got an astronaut in orbit that needs to be rescued. Of course, the big question is, how did he get there? Because he was not launched on any space program ship, and he doesn't seem to have a ship in orbit anywhere, disabled or otherwise. So there will be questions to answer there. Meanwhile, I stop over here at the administration building to enact a strategy that will, at the cost of some reputation, yield additional funding. And the purpose for this is to help get the space program on the ball, get it rolling, and provide the financing necessary for some of the longer, deeper missions that will be forthcoming. Meanwhile, a prior vehicle that was used for, I believe, a polar flight several episodes ago is now being redesigned. First, the experimental material is taken off and the design is saved, and then the ship gets modified so that it can be used to rescue lone Kerbal astronauts in orbit that have no business being there in the first place. A little bit of farting around here and I get things straightened out and get a reasonable design for this purpose. And so we adjourn to the launch pad as we get ready to start the flight. I have to say that, yes, my voice does not sound quite normal right now. And the reason for that is that I've got a bad sore throat problem. I believe it's a touch of strep. And as a result, I cannot speak at a normal tone of voice. In fact, I can't speak above a whisper at the moment. And so this is the reason that I am recording post-commentary and touching up the audio before I render the video. And hopefully this will be easy enough to hear and still make for a reasonable video. Okay, so we get everything ready. We set our astronaut in orbit as target, and then we proceed on what is mostly a pretty standard launch for this series. It's rather slow to start off with, but the ship accelerates very quickly, breaking Mach very early on, within about 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers above the ground. Not the most stable design in the world, I admit. You can tell as the ship passes through Mach speed, the Mach effect coming off the wings and so on, and stability is really questionable until those SRBs burn out. Once the SRBs burn out and separate, controllability is much better on the main engines. And from here, it's a pretty standard flight to orbit with a somewhat aggressive turn because of how much power the ship's main engines have. Thank you, KW Rocketry. And now, having brought the apoapsis up close to that of our intended target, a quick burn is calculated for circularizing the orbit, mostly. I'm going to leave the periapsis somewhat low to help with phasing to get the ship closer to the target so that we can get a quick pickup, because as far as I understand, the life support countdown on the astronaut's suit-based life support begins when you start the mission to go get him. And that means we have to get to him and get him aboard the ship and back to the surface before his suit's life support capabilities run out. And now, the next thing I'm doing here is working out a correction burn to happen at my periapsis to adjust the closest approach to the astronaut, because I'm kind of wanting to do this in one orbit from launch to get him picked up as quickly as possible. Because I don't know exactly how much life support those suits have. I suppose I should have looked it up, but I don't know what it has in terms of life support, so I figure get it done as quickly as possible. First correction burn puts it in fairly close, about 112 kilometers distant, and another little bit of calculations there for another burn at closest approach to correct it even further. A burn that I then proceed to overshoot just a little bit and end up having to use RCS to correct it, which means I probably should have used RCS for the burn to start with. The big Maverick 1D on that second stage is really good, but a little bit overkill for this small of a burn. And now from here, the remainder of the flight is actually very simple docking maneuver style thing. Get to closest approach and then kill the relative velocity, and then thrust toward the target to close the closest approach distance down, and again kill relative velocity when you get close, and so on. Just rinse and repeat until you're close enough to do your docking maneuver, or in this case to switch to the astronaut and bring him aboard the ship. Now, I've noticed that I cannot switch to that astronaut until I'm really close. I'm wanting to say within a kilometer. I hadn't actually tried to switch to him much farther away from that. I don't know what the maximum distance is you can switch to him. Here we're finishing off the last of that second stage. Closing the close approach distance down to just under a kilometer. closing in close and killing the remaining relative velocity. We're finally within 5 kilometers. And finishing the job on the LV909. And here's where I have to note that while I did put RCS on this thing, I didn't balance it to include having it on the third stage there, which I should have. It would have made the flight a little easier to control. But nonetheless, after a little bit of jockeying around back and forth, I get the ship suitably close to the astronaut, allowing for the fact that I did overshoot and have to race the other direction to catch up with him again. And the whole rendezvous would have been a lot easier had the ship had one additional set of RCS thruster quads. Now Cormy Kerman is within 40-some, about 43 kilometers of the ship. And I get rid of the robot command module and the RCS tanks and so on. I had originally intended to put that together as a satellite and leave it in orbit, but in retrospect I left a few things off of the satellite and it's kind of pointless. And anyway, now begins the usual and customary dance in space of trying to get an astronaut close enough to the hatchway ladder to grab a hold and get aboard. But finally, Mr. Corby Kerman is aboard, and then it's just a simple matter of setting up a re-entry and getting him back down to the ground. And of course, upon return to the ground, the game will inform me that he is now part of the space program and I can use him on missions and such. But Mr. Kerman will not be taking part in any missions. He will not be flying spacecraft or aircraft or any other things. He will spend the foreseeable future in a very small room deep underneath the Space Center answering questions like, how did he get into space in the first place? Where did he get his ship? What happened to his ship once he got into orbit? And so on. These and other interesting questions will be asked of him until he provides satisfactory answers. And now in upcoming missions, we have a contract to place a flag on the moon, and I also want to get a satellite in orbit around the moon that will be there for the purpose of scanning and mapping for mineable deposits. So there will be a forthcoming return to the moon and a return to Minmus as well for additional mapping and landings. But that, of course, will be in an upcoming episode. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. I'm out of here.